Greetings everyone, it is I, the Future Godfather, and welcome back to another video. And today, for the first ever review on the Future Godfather, I'm going to be talking about the debut-full-length studio album from Pantha du Prince, Diamond Daze. Yup, it's finally time for the video you've all been waiting for, my first ever review on this channel. For anyone who's subscribed to my other account, RobGeo0407L, you guys may remember that on the community tab some time ago, I promoted this channel as like some sort of a commentary channel, i.e. history of music genres and all that. But then I pondered for a moment and I was like, you know what? I'll do music reviews here. Kind of like a wonky angle sort of thing. So that's what this channel will be mainly focusing on. Also, since I do in fact have a CD collection, I'll occasionally do some CD unboxing videos in case if there's a long gap in between uploads, because at the end of the day, I'm just really busy with not only my other account, but also college as well. And yes, I am in fact a freshman in college. But about this review, it's not only the first one on the channel, but it's also the start of a discography review on Pantha du Prince. Of course, I'll cover any other projects you want me to talk about in the future. Hell, that new Alexander Panos album may very well be my next review, also no pun intended. But this will be the start of a series where I cover all 7 of his albums individually throughout the course of multiple videos, starting with his debut over here, Diamond Daze, all the way up to his most recent album. After that, I'll do an odds and ends video on some of his other projects, including some compilations of his, as well as that one project he released under his own name, and also a list of my top 10 favorite tracks from him, and a worst to best ranking on all of his albums, just like the wonky angle. Just because, you know, I like being original, am I right, guys? Now let's actually talk about this artist. Pantha du Prince, real name Hendrik Weber, is a German electronic music producer who specializes in mainly minimal techno, macro house, and dark ambient, most notably the former 2 subgenres. My first exposure to his music was his follow-up album, This Bliss, from 2007, which I'm not going to give too much of my thoughts away because of this discography review, but long story short, I thought that album was fantastic, and it's easily my favorite album from the guy, period. But the album that really convinced me that I should go check out his music more was his most recent album that came out not too long ago back in August of this year, Garden Gaia, which is honestly the best album he's made since This Bliss, and I would also consider this to be a top 10 contender for the best album of 2022 on top of it. Also a fantastic project. But what about this debut here? Well, I think this is a very solid start to his catalog. I don't think it's as good as This Bliss because I feel like the ideas explored there were much better fleshed out and executed, but at the same time, I pretty much like the majority of the tracks on here. This is also coupled with the fact that there are definitely a few tracks that I would consider to be keepers as well. Now let's go through the tracks. Opening up this album is the 8-minute long Suzan, which to me does a great job at letting you know exactly what you're getting into. Nice chord progression, nice synth passages, nicely integrated percussion and driving kick drum, and I also really love that high-pitched lead that appears in the track here and there too. It may be far and away the longest track here, but it doesn't feel overly long either. That track is great, I like it. Then we get Saint Denis Bay Licht, sorry for the awful pronunciation, I was never taught a lick of German in my life, which starts with this sustaining ambient pad that carries over from the end of the previous track until about a little over a minute into this track. In my opinion, even though the chords and melodies on that track aren't as memorable as Suzanne's, they're also a tad bit more captivating to me than that track does well somehow. I also do appreciate the integration of ride cymbals and that riffy electric keyboard lead to give it a bit more of a jazzy feel too. The Ride for Romance is honestly such a beautiful track. The beginning kind of reminds me a lot of the track Morningside by Quartet, especially when it comes to the way the chords sound as well as the kick acting as the holy grail. And like with the last 2 tracks, the percussion is nicely integrated, especially the ride cymbals again, which in turn are starting to remind me a bit more of the work from Trent Mueller, a la The Last Resort, even though that project came out 3 years after this one. Either way, despite me thinking that this track doesn't necessarily have the best dynamics by any stretch, the simple but effective chord structure and how everything is nicely mixed is what makes me come back to this track frequently, and is also what makes it one of the standouts in my eyes. However, from 3 standout tracks in a row, we get Satin Drone, which is unfortunately one of the weaker cuts here. And while it does have some nice chords and all, it kind of sounds like it's a bit buried in the mix against said bass line. The track's fine, I could see this being a highlight for some, and I do like these little windish sounds that also happen throughout the majority of the track. But it's not really one of my favorites personally. Eisregen's really cool. It's got a more engaging bass line than the previous track, and the ambient synth passages are like the real star of the show here. And it's even got wind chimes thrown in there every now and then. Nice track to cap off the first half of the album. Then we get Circle Glider, which I don't really enjoy it as much as the other tracks here. To start, the intro is really weird because of this acoustic band-like sample which seems to get cut off every 2 seconds or so before getting into a bit of a loop the second time that happens. On top of that, the transition in between this intro and the beat-driven section feels really jarring and forced as hell, not to mention that the tinnitus ringing like lead can get a bit annoying. Also, while the metallic percussion sounds kind of cool, this whole track for the most part feels empty to me, with nothing much in the way of progression besides that and the barely audible low rumbling bass line, making the 7-minute track feel totally sluggish to me. I'm sorry, but this is by far the worst track in the bunch. Thankfully, things do get back on track with Butterfly Girl, which is a pretty nice serviceable track on here despite clearly not being one of the standouts. It takes a bit for this track to get going for me, as the first 90 seconds of this track mainly comprise of the kick and some metallic percussion, although it doesn't sound as overstated as the percussion on Circle Glider. However, one of my favorite aspects of this track is the way the chords sound and the way they are structured, especially in the beatless sections. Not only that, but the small minor things on here, like the occasional ringing sounds, do give this track a totally different feel, but in a good way, especially in comparison to the previous track. Overall, not one of my favorites, but it's good. I don't have much to say about Schneeflieder, but it's also a really good track in the track listing. It's got some nice little synth passages that do kind of sound like a choir in many areas, and I also really like that whistleish lead. I also like how there are these little harpsichord-like chords that are on the 4-minute mark to give it a bit more layering too. Aside from this 2-minute long ambient outro that feels a bit too long-winded for my liking, it's a really good track all things considered. But then there's Sad Saphire, which, where do I actually begin with this? I shouldn't love it as much as I do, but god damn is it the best track here. The most notable thing I can point out regarding this track is that it sounds really haunting as a whole in one of the best ways possible. The kick drum may be a bit understated here, but the main thing that keeps me coming back to it are the low rumbling ambient synth passages and the sheer amount of suspenseful, whooshing-like sound effects that just really add to this track, to be sure. Listening to this track more or less makes me feel like I'm traveling through a very dark rainforest. It may be the minimalist sounding track of them all, but it doesn't deter me from saying that this is one of the guy's best easily. Lastly, we get Glycerin, which is honestly a great album closer if you ask me. It starts with a sub bass that's mixed well with a nice piano lead, and what I'm assuming is the voice of Hendrik himself. There are also, you guessed it, more ambient pads that are more audibly visible as the track progresses, alongside some more pianos for good measure. And all of it sounds really nice as well. It may not be as haunting as Sad Saphire, but this track here makes for a genuinely nice closer. And that's pretty much everything on Diamond Daze. Overall, this is a pretty good album from the guy. Sure, I do have my fair share of problems with this particular project, mainly just the moments that feel empty and overly long in some parts, but the not very good moments are small compared to the genuinely good moments, and I won't deny that the good moments are really freaking good. On top of that, like I mentioned before I started going through everything, there are definitely some tracks worth keeping and returning to. Like with The Right for Romance and Sad Saphire, for instance. Not every track blows my mind or anything like that, but the melodies and the overall atmosphere do keep me coming back for more for a few select tracks. Even though I do prefer the spacey and instantly gratifying tones of this bliss, I don't see this album being a bad start for new listeners to his music either. So yeah, album solid, go check this out if you want, and for this one I'm feeling a solid 7.7 out of 10 on it. But what do you think about this album? If you have any thoughts on it, or if you would like for me to review something, you can feel free to let me know in the comments. Please remember that everything I said in this video is all my opinion and only reflects on personal enjoyment. If you want to listen to this album, I provided a Spotify link, which will be in the description of this video down below. Also, please subscribe to the channel if you want, so you don't miss videos like this one. But yeah, this is it for today. Thank you for watching, and until then, this is me, the future Godfather, signing out. Take care, stay safe, and have a fantastic day.